to be with the top team at the time, which was Cape, it was like 300 US.
Oof. Yeah, right.
And the dollar was like,
yeah, that was back when it was like 50
cents. And so it was like crazy. And it was sort of like the team I tested with, like all year, they'd sort of been like a mid-pack team. And I think at the test day, I think one day we were third quickest, and on the next day we were fourth. And so they were pretty pumped to have me. And the deal they offered me was a really great deal. But even then, it was sort of like, nah, it's just not feasible. You know, we went from the little trailer with the wooden wheels on the Formula Ford to get it in, like it wasn't going to be within reach. Yeah. And so we sort of came back to Oz and we're sort of like, well, what are we going to do? Yeah. And that's when Neil Bates, because he was very integral to sort of setting up the 86 series, sort of said to us, well, why don't you come do this?
Go, go, go! Are you doing anything? That's a massive crash. And it's happened immediately. This is amazing. Big shot, and it's lights out, and away we go.
I wanted to go IndyCar, like bad.
I haven't done my stats then. Yeah. I said to Brooke, I was like, 100% he wanted to do Supercars. So you wanted to do IndyCar in the open wheel route?
Yeah, I was a big IndyCar fan. Yeah. Like massive willpower fan. And like when I went over there, I was like, man, this is where we need to be. Like this is it. And then you sort of get the quotes for, you know, what it's going to cost to race there. And, it, you know, to be with the top team at the time, which was Cape, it was like 300 US.
Oof.
Yeah, right.
And the dollar was like,
yeah, that was back when it was like 50
cents. And so it was like crazy. And it was sort of like the team I tested with, like all year, they'd sort of been like a mid-pack team. And I think at the test day, I think one day we were third quickest, and on the next day we were fourth. And so they were pretty pumped to have me. And the deal they offered me was a really great deal. But even then, it was sort of like, nah, it's just not feasible. You know, we went from the little trailer with the wooden wheels on the Formula Ford to get it in, like it wasn't going to be within reach. Yeah. And so we sort of came back to Oz and we're sort of like, well, what are we going to do? Yeah. And that's when Neil Bates, because he was very integral to sort of setting up the 86 series, sort of said to us, well, why don't you come do this? And so we sort of committed pretty late to do that. You know, we were probably a little bit behind other teams when it came to, you know, building a car and getting organised. But then when we rolled out at Winton for the first round, you know, qualified pole and won the first few races, and it was sort of like, oh, cool. We're picking up where we left off from Formula Ford. And, you know, we had a great start to the year. And then the first little blip was at Eastern Creek where I'd won the first two races, and then the third race, there was a big shunt. And like the ambulance was out on track, and you know, it's they should have red flagged the race, right? Because obviously the guy was maybe not in a good way, and so the race, but we just sort of trundled around on the safety car, and then we got told over race radio, this race is going to finish under safety car. You know, just follow the safety car to the checker flag. Yep, no worries. I'm not warming my tyres up or anything. I look at Will Brown behind me. He's like weaving and everything. Yeah. What are you doing, man? The race is over. Yeah. So anyway, we come round the final corner. Yeah. Normally if a safety car comes in, like they turn the lights off early. Yeah, yeah. And we come around the final corner, and all of a sudden the safety car just turns the lights off and comes into pit lane. Like,
with how many laps to go? Like a lap?
I don't know. The race is supposed to finish. Yeah, yeah. And then I'm sort of in like fourth gear, like cruising down, and I'm looking up at the flag stand, and I'm going, oh, they should have a checker flag. Yeah. And then I see the guys holding a green flag. Yeah. And I'm like, oh, what's going on? Yeah. So I sort of start to like build my speed up slowly, but not a good restart by any means. And so all of a sudden they've restarted the race. Yeah. This is out of nowhere. Yeah. I'm fully unprepared. Tyres are cold, got garbage on them. There was oil at turn one from someone, and I've made an absolute meal of turn one. Yeah. And Will's got up the inside, and then I got hung out to dry, and I dropped back to third. And like, mate, I was to lose a race like that. Like I was livid. Like,
do you remember where you finished that race? Fourth or something?
Finished third.
Third. Okay, cool.
I was very, very upset.
How did those guys seem to know what was going on? You said if they're warming up their tyres, were they just kind of waiting and hoping?
I think now my rule of thumb is essentially play the whistle. I do not trust race control. If race control says this race is finishing, I'm still ready for the race to restart, because if someone throws a green flag, I will not be making that mistake again. I even say to all my Formula Ford kids, if they tell me over race radio, the race is going to finish behind the safety car, I say, just be ready for a restart, just in case. The race will probably finish now. Yeah. So learnt my lesson. And then, we just had a rough run then, and so maybe as a young driver, I might have, maybe that just sort of rattled me a little bit, having a race win sort of taken off me like that. Sandown was a rough round. I made a mistake and outbrake myself, and I ran into Tim Brook, and unfortunately did a lot of damage to both our cars, and then Bathurst, it was just another tough race. They cancelled qualifying, and so we had to start where we finished practice, and because the first practice was so much quicker than the second practice because of the cold air, I was started 7th, and then you're in that battle pack, and so there was just a few things that sort of just didn't go our way. But I learned a lot. I learned a lot of lessons. I learned how to deal with, obviously, the unexpected, because I'd sort of had a pretty good run over the past 18 months at that time, and I sort of did a lot of character development, as they say, in that time. And so finished that year 3rd. The last round was at Homebush. It was the last ever Homebush, and
that was a great track, by the way. I thought it was cool.
It was cool. Yeah, it was cool. It was challenging. What
was it like to drive?
First street track for me. And it was cool to sort of send it over the curbs and everything. It was sort of me and Will. Will just had my measure that weekend. He got the win, and I was sort of chasing him the whole way. But it was sort of cool to obviously push each other so hard at a track like that. So then we went into the second year of 86, because always sort of looking at what that next step was, and we'd sort of identified that Porsche Carrera Cup would have been a good avenue, because obviously the cars are all spec, they're all the same. And for us as a small team, that presented a good opportunity to sort of compete at a level playing field. But it was right at the time where it was the last year of the Gen 1 991. And so it was sort of like, maybe if we just hold out and wait for the new car, because then obviously that way we don't have to then get one car and then immediately replace it. So we did another year of 86s.
What was that year like? Because didn't you had another crack, or was it another shit show?
So qualify on pole at Phillip Island. Even though my fastest lap was deleted. So on
track
pole.
Limits. Was it?
No, it was a sporting thing. You're not supposed to line up in the fast lane in 86s if there's a red flag. And I went and queued up, and so bad, lost the fastest lap. But thankfully, when I went back out there, I did another lap that was good enough to put me on the front row. And then I was leading the first race, and then an adversary, Aaron Seaton, he just sort of went for a move and didn't quite get in there, and just sort of punted me, and it cut my tyre down. So I got a flat tyre. So anyway, finished that race last. Next race, because they're such short races, you've got such short time, there's 4 green racing laps, I got back to 15th from 36th, and then the next race was only 2 laps, because there was, I don't know if you remember at turn 4, there was that massive pile up, and there was 6 Toyota 86s.
Just pulling it,
Thankfully, I went left and I didn't go right. But the first round, obviously, we didn't get a huge haul of points. And then the recovery sort of started. So, we were winning a lot of races, sort of catching back up in the championship. And then Townsville, there was a race that got cancelled because the track was blocked and there was a big shunt. So there was a few opportunities where we could have scored points where we should get that opportunity. And then we got to Bathurst, and thankfully this time qualifying did happen. Qualified on pole and won the first race. And, that was my, first time I'd won at Bathurst, and that was a big deal. and then normally after the races, the cars go to Parc Fermé. But they also did the podium in the Parc Fermé area, which was a bit funny.
Yeah.
And so there was heaps of people everywhere.
Yeah.
And
this is at Bathurst, isn't it?
This is at Bathurst. Yeah, this is at Bathurst.
Yeah.
And then while all the sort of stuff was going on, the cars were in Parc Fermé, one of my crew was chatting to some people and, sort of thought he was doing the right thing. He's like, come over, come have a look at the car, and open the bonnet.
Yeah.
And then the car's in Parc Fermé, right? You're not
Yeah.
allowed to touch the car.
Yeah.
And then I think someone said something, and then all of a sudden the stewards are coming over and they're saying, "Oh, you guys touched the car in Parc Fermé. You can't do that. You're disqualified." And I was gutted, right? I was.
Would that have won you the championship?
Well,
technically,
it would have won me the championship because if I'd obviously won that race, I would have started from pole.
Yeah.
And I felt like I would have been a good chance to obviously continue the sort of role that I was on.
Yeah.
But instead, I was disqualified. I had to start dead last. And then the next race was the race where they had that crash going up Mountain Straight.
Yeah.
And so I was right behind, might have been Luke King.
Yeah.
Like pushing him. And like we were sort of going past a few guys.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden the crash happens up the road. And so he gets on the brakes because there's a crash in front of him. I can't see it. And so I just like plow into him. Yeah. Car's like stuffed, the bonnet. There's a great shot of Sean Tidyman because I drive around. I get back to the pits. There's a great shot of him. It was on the news.
Yeah.
He body slammed the bonnet to get it back down.
Yeah.
And we went back out there, but it threw a belt. And so I've now had a DQ, and then I had a DNF.
Yeah.
And then the last race I went from 36th to 15th or something. But
see, this is what happens when you don't wear lucky undies.
Yeah, right. I know, right? If I had only worn my lucky undies that day, I must have worn my unlucky ones. So that was, we took a massive hit, right? In the points, like huge. And then got to Newcastle. There was the first time Newcastle happened.
Yeah.
And had a great weekend, like clean swept the weekend and ended up finishing second in the championship. But never got to win that one.
Never got to win it. I've got to actually ask.
Then there was the messy COVID years when you were trying to do it.
Then
that got written off. Yeah. So for everybody. Yeah.
What was I going to say? Oh, that's right. Lockie Gibbons brought it up. Because I've only done state racing, right? Is there like a certain technique to get around? Like, is there a certain way to get around street circuits and make yourself quick? Like, because it's a total different. Like, the only closest thing I've done is Sandown, right? So, is there a certain way to be quick around there? Have they been taught like via the 86 coaches? Do you know what I mean? Because that's what Gibbons brought in with Barguana. He was teaching drivers. Oh yeah. Do you know what I mean? Like Luff there, and were they giving you advice back then when you were younger?
Yeah, it was really good to have obviously the mentors in the 86 series. Like super useful for obviously.
Yeah.
So many drivers who haven't done that sort of level of racing or at a street track or at Bathurst. But for sure, I think to be quick at a street track, you need to be really on top of the car, right? So you need to have complete trust in the car, and you know that if you do something, it's not going to bite you or it's going to stick.
Yep.
And then it's just about taking it's risk versus reward. So the more risk you take, the closer you get to the walls. The later you brake, obviously, the faster you go. But obviously the consequence is when you get it wrong, there's no margin for error.
Yeah.
So at a open track like Eastern Creek or Phillip Island, there is margin for error. You can drop the other side off, put a wheel in the grass, or even have a spin and come out the other side and you're okay. But if you do that at a street track, game over. Yeah. So I think it's, you need to obviously have a lot of confidence in the car, in your ability, and then you need to know the track as well. It's so important to do track walks at street tracks, and look at the curbs, look at the road surface, look for those little things, because it's those little things that can make a difference. You can find time, or you can get caught out.
Yeah, and you were saying before you were looking at the Porsches after the Toyotas. You got into Porsches, and then you had the Bull Rush Rally team help you out, and you did a Bull Rush Rally. What is that business? I don't understand. He loves his cars. What's his name? Simon, I think.
Well, there's Simon and Marco.
Simon and Marco, there we go.
It's a pretty cool business, right? Like, essentially, they run an event where all these guys with, luxury cars come together and they raise money for charity, and have a little bit of fun along the way. But they did some really cool sort of liveries and stuff for their rally, and I just bumped into him at Bathurst, and I think the first year of my Porsche racing, the car was pretty plain. Yeah, and he was sort of like, "Oh, maybe we could help out," and that's when we did that pretty out there livery with the sort of graffiti street art sort of thing. It was a
you were with Garth. You were with Garth Walden your first year, weren't you? You were learning the ropes. How did that all work for you?
First year we were very much just sort of on our own, and we were in the deep end. And we went from obviously we won the Formula Ford Championship, and then in the '86 series where there's not many big teams, it's a lot of sort of privateers. Yeah, we went from being sort of like one of the more organised little outfits to Carrera Cup, where we were like little fish, big pond, like we were out of our depth. And I think we pitted next to Garth a couple times. He was running India and Padiachi, and we didn't have, at the beginning, we didn't even have a tyre trolley, right? We had a plastic table, and then we just stacked the tyres out the back. And at Adelaide, you needed a tender vehicle, and so I'm pretty sure we ended up sharing a tender vehicle. It might not have been at Adelaide, but definitely at the Grand Prix. I think they loaned us a tyre trolley. That's how it started.
Garth Walden.
Garth loaned us a tyre trolley. And then, I just started a data share where, we would share my data and footage for India to look at, and, they would sort of help us with, they started loaning us the pit walling and stuff like that. So I think Garth saw a lot of himself in me and Colin, how he had to do it himself, when he raced V8s back in the day, and he was sort of doing it with his old man. I think he sort of saw what we were doing and wanted to help because he sort of knew how hard it was.
Yeah. And with your racing, with your Porsches, was it 2 or 3 years in the Porsches, was it? Or
I call it 3.5 because, like we said, COVID sort of happened. So 2018 was my first year in Carrera Cup, and we were in the deep end, and we learnt so much in that first year. We went from sort of the fringe of the top 10 to I finished third outright at Bathurst, which was pretty mega. So. In our second year, I sort of thought, we learnt heaps last year. We'll be sweet this year. We'll be on top of it. But I reckon I learnt just as much in my second year in Carrera Cup as I did in the first. It's just that the starting point was a little bit higher. And it was in the second year where we continued our relationship with Garth and GWR, and started working with Dejan Jinic, who was one of the engineers there. Yep. And sort of... Devarshan and I shared Dion and shared data and a lot of that, and that was the first time I had ever worked with an engineer, from a data engineer sense. it'd always sort of been Dad and I doing it paper and pen and kind of by braille. We'd have our ideas. Dad would change the car, I'd go out, go, oh, that was better or that was worse, and we sort of did it all by trial and error. Yeah, this is the first time that I'd worked with an engineer who would delve into the data, and Dion, he's world class. He's worked in world rally teams and stuff, and just the stuff that I was exposed to, it was the whole world opens up, and I learnt so much. And I look at what my Formula Ford kids get now, because I've obviously had the benefit of so much wisdom and knowledge, and I'm giving it to them in Formula Ford at the very beginning of their journey, whereas I didn't have that. I looked at the data myself, and I didn't have anyone else's data to compare to. I would always look at my laps and kind of go, okay, well, why did I go quicker on lap 8 versus lap 7, and you'd start to pull the pieces together. But like Diane sort of opened my brain up to a whole new world, and I learnt so much in that second year of Carrera Cup, and we definitely took a step up. Like I had my first race win at Darwin, and learnt so much, and so then 2020 we were like, now we've got it sorted. Now we're going to go out there and we're going to win this thing.
Want to hear more? Each week we will share the hottest clips from our guest interviews on YouTube. But to hear the full episode, make sure to subscribe or follow us on your favourite podcast platform.